Welcome to the Comics Experience panel on breaking into comics at San Diego Comic-Con. Comics Experience is the online comic school at comicsexperience.com. Give it a visit, check out the newsletter, sign up for the newsletter if you're interested in the courses or our Creators Workshop. We're also the brand new publisher, Comics Experience Publishing, and we're at cexpublishing.com. Our first comic, Stud and the Bloodblade #1, hits shelves at the end of July, which, if I haven't missed my guess, is right around now. So we do creator-owned comics with creator-friendly deals. My name's Andy Schmidt. I started at Marvel as an editor, created Annihilation, the event that reimagined the Guardians of the Galaxy into what we know them to be today. Then I went to IDW, where I relaunched G.I. Joe, Transformers, Dungeons & Dragons, and a host of other properties. But at Comics Experience, both the education company and the publishing company, our focus is on you, helping bring new creators into the comics industry and bring their stories to the market. New voices, new blood, new ideas, new genres, and that means we need people just like you. So, welcome to the Comics Experience Breaking into Comics panel. There's lots of great advice you're about to get. Thanks very much for joining us. Have a great Comic-Con. Be sure to check out comicsexperience.com. Sign up for that newsletter if you think those courses are going to be helpful. And check out cexpublishing.com for our latest titles. Hopefully one day you'll see your own name on covers there. Thanks very much and enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bon Alimagno. I'm the publishing director for Comics Experience Publishing. Thanks for joining us here at virtual San Diego Comic-Con for the Breaking into Comics and Staying in panel. Joining us today, Kyle Higgins, Marissa Louise, and Paul Allor. Kyle's been working on Radiant Black, Cowl, Power Rangers. Anything more recent you wanna talk about?
I do all the Ultraman books at Marvel. Marvel just announced I'm doing a big new Darkhawk series, and then we just announced my next Image series called Ordinary Gods. It'll start coming out in July.
And Marissa, you've been doing Amethyst, Grumble through Albatross Press, Hexwives. What else has been going on?
I'm in that gray zone that many of you are all familiar with, where I have lots of things in the pipe, but everything's on NDA. So there's some great stuff I would love to talk to you about, but womp womp.
And Paul, in addition to your duties as an instructor at Comics Experience and also managing editor for Comic Experience Publishing, you've been doing a ton of things lately. A book for Vault. You've done stuff for the Turtles and G.I. Joe. Any of that you want to plug or talk about?
Hollow Heart is the book for Vault. The 4th issue is coming out Wednesday, and I have a Godzilla one-shot coming out in a month or two. That's about it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit quickly about Comic Experience. It's an online learning school for those who want to learn more about the craft, break into the industry, hone their current talents, and also network with other like-minded folks. The site offers courses on every discipline within comics, but also specialized master classes and advanced classes. Speaking of which, coming up, we've got a master seminar with Philip Kenny Johnson on July 31st. Advanced figure drawing and anatomy with Philip Sevi starting on Tuesday, September 21st. And advanced comic book coloring with Chris Sotomayor starting on Monday, November 8th. Please go to comicexperience.com/courses for more information. Also, while you're there, feel free to join the newsletter so that you can keep up to date with the latest announcements. Comic Experience also hosts a Creators Workshop, a 24/7 community for people sharing their current work, asking each other for advice, picking each other's brain. All the discussions there are private and self-contained, especially among the pros here. So you'll be getting information and insights there that you wouldn't get anywhere else. So, like a lot of things at Comic Experience, we've got methodology for everything that we teach. And so you might think that breaking into comics is something that you might have heard that there's no one particular way to break into comics. But we do think that there is a particular method, not just for breaking in, but for staying in. And it comes down for breaking into 3 fundamentals. Talent, which sounds like that's obvious. But from my point of view, especially as someone who used to be the talent coordinator and talent scout for Marvel, what's really important in terms of talent is having a ready-made, easily accessible way to explain and demonstrate what your talent is? Do you have an online portfolio? Do you have a social media presence where you're sharing that portfolio? How can people get in touch with you? Your portfolio and your contact information should never be more than two or three clicks away from a simple Google search. Also, the way that you've set up your portfolio. Are you showing all the different styles, all the different experiences, all the different ways that your writing and your art has evolved? No one publisher and no one editor is the same, obviously, and so they'd be looking for different things. So any way that you can show the different ways that your talent evidences itself, the better. Persistence. I think we always talk about how long it takes to break into comics, but really a lot of that is just because there've been decades worth of other talent ahead of you, so who've also been as persistent as you have been. So I hate to almost put it this way, but it's almost like you've got to wait your turn. But at the same time, it's a matter of persistence and keeping up with your contacts, with your network, with your publishers. Do you have a polite but consistent way of staying in touch with your collaborators and your editors so that you remain on their radar? Because that all feeds into the third thing, luck. And you'd think that that's something that is kind of hard to define, but I actually heard a really interesting definition of it by Russell Wilson, the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. He defines luck as preparation, as when preparation meets opportunity. And in comics, I've seen that happen again and again and again, where folks who are fully prepared, have been sharing their portfolios, taking feedback, improving their portfolios, incorporating that advice, but they're just kind of sitting around. Some magical moment happens where maybe there's an artist who, say, like, leaves Marvel for DC, or someone who decides to retire because maybe they made some Netflix money or something, and then all of a sudden there are all these openings that popped up over at certain publishers, and suddenly there's new open doors for creators to step in and start taking on new work.
You're talking about a place that is like a big priority to you or is very important to you as a creator. And so then you would be very aware of how many hours, days, minutes, weeks go by before there's a response. And I actually think my advice is a little broader than that, in that what I very much agree with what you're talking about, Bon, about putting yourself in positions where certain relationships and even just meeting people actually is so important in comics can happen. I was just talking to a friend the other night who's a very good writer, a very good comics writer. And he was saying, hey, how do I get Marvel and DC like interested at all here? And he's like, never gotten a call. And based on the stuff he's done, it's like, that would make sense that he would get a call or he would be doing that stuff. And I told him, I said, you know what, man, I said, now that once conventions start back up, because I know what he's doing convention wise, and like he's going to be doing some stuff with like comic sketch art where I'm repped at, etc. I said, I think that's actually going to be really helpful because you're going to meet other writers that are all, working. And so then those opportunities can kind of organically happen. So like I and Paul, I know you're kind of like this too. It's like, we'll kind of do work for whoever will hire us to a certain extent. I'm pickier on my creator owned stuff, but I've done work at Dynamite. I've done work at Boom. I've done work at DC, at Marvel. I think I'm missing one or two places. And then some offshoot places that were like startups I was willing to take a shot on. And one of those was a long wait because they kept saying they had money and yet wouldn't close the contract. But what they were offering to pay was such a high page rate that it was like, oh, I'm going to hold out hope. But then as the months turn into half a year, turns into 10 months, you're like, okay, this isn't real. And then sure enough, they ended up folding up. But I would say, like, don't prioritize one place. Like you need to be looking at kind of any opportunities that seem viable. And you often don't know the relationships that will yield into those opportunities. I think there's a misnomer when you're starting out as well. Like, you have to be talking to editors and you have to get in front of editors and editors need to meet you. And there is some truth to that, but I think just as equally as important are fellow writers. fellow creators, fellow artists, especially at conventions. I mean, those are the people you're going to be coming up with. But also, like, there are, I can't tell you how many times I've recommended writers or artists for gigs just because I've heard of something that a friend of mine has and needs to find someone for. And I go like, oh, you know what? I just met somebody that, weirdly enough, that they might actually be a good fit for that.
Yeah, I can tell you that. I mean, the importance of the writers is a huge one. I mean, most editors tend to hire more on a fellow writer's recommendation than on a fellow editor's recommendation, or than on just reading the stuff on their own. But yeah, I can tell you there are editors that I've literally been sending my stuff to for 10 years and have not worked with them. And, you know, I keep on sending it. A lot of the editors that I have worked with, I sent them my stuff for 5, 6, 7 years before they hired me for the first thing they hired me for. There's one example, and you will probably be able to figure out which editor this was based on tracking his career. But I sent him my stuff at one of the big 2 shops, and then at the other big 2 shops, and then at the original big 2 shop, as he like ping pong between them. And then he went and became the editor-in-chief of a more creator-owned oriented place. And after literally, like, I think 6 or 7 years of reaching out to him, Kyle introduced me to him at a con, and it was shortly after that I actually got a book placed at his new shop. And then I think that book was largely because I had a really artist involved as well. So, you know, I mean, that's not, that story doesn't reflect well upon me, but, you know, take it however you can get it. And that's I mean, the persistence really does have to be just extraordinary. Sometimes for some people it happens faster. And I think that's where that luck and opportunity comes in. But for some people, you really just have to keep on hammering away for literally a decade for me so far.
So one of the experiences I had was when I was earlier in my career. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to an editor, and we really wanted to work together. But all the work they could offer me at that time was something that I was very uncomfortable working on. But because I was able to turn them down in a professional way, and one that didn't put them in a bad position and didn't make them feel bad, a few years later, when they were at Vertigo, they asked me to be on Hex Wives. And to get into DC is very challenging. You really need the editor's trust there. So the point of that is that I want people to understand that things that seem like a huge disappointment, because that was a crushing disappointment early on in my career, but it ended up actually being a huge benefit. And I think that's another form of luck that we really have to be aware of.
Yeah, I think you brought up trust, which I think is really like a lot of the 3 fundamentals all build up. Even if, like Paul, like you've been in communication with an editor for 6 or 7 years, obviously they didn't tell you to go away because they trust you. And there's, for whatever reason on their end, they've been waiting for the stars to align so that they could bring you in.
With Radiant Black right now, I've actually been, it's been kind of a priority of mine to bring in some outside people to do cool stuff. So whether it be creators that I like or have been, you know, stuff I like, or, you know, sometimes newer people that I don't know. Whether, you know, we've got these series of backups that we do, these 1-page backups called Marshall's School of Business. And there's a bunch of brand new writers that we're publishing with those. We also are publishing some new artists and a lot of established artists as well. And then, you know, certainly we have a ton of covers that we've been doing. So it's actually been fun for me because for many years I've done conventions for 10 years now, you know, as a pro, and just you see so many people's stuff and then you watch them get better over the years as well. And it's like in the past, it's like every here and there I was able to help someone or help facilitate an opportunity. But now with this book, it's been really, really cool in that I'm really able to do more. Like I've brought in some co-writers to do their first comics work. They're going to be writing, Cherish Chen is writing issue 6 of Radiant Black with me. So in a weird way, it's almost like kind of like Michael and I talk about this, my editor, on the lookout on social media across the board for new kind of people and new art samples or new artists in particular. I guess just make sure your stuff, especially if you're an artist, it's like it's easy to find your profile or your portfolio.
Well, I am a big Discord dork now, and I can tell you there are a few like aspiring comics professional Discords, and then there's pro ones also, but those are like you do have to be fairly published to get into those. But there's one like Nick Filardi's. He has a Discord, and it's very well moderated. It's very fun. People post jobs they come across in there, and they're constantly like trying to hype each other up, trying to help each other build teams and get in contact with people. So it's less permeable than it was like 10 years ago on Twitter, but it's the same thing that can feel cliquish, but I promise you, if you are just polite and kind to people, it won't be an issue.
And that actually brings me to the next section that basically you've just previewed, Marissa. In terms of staying in comics, what are the best ways? What's a methodology to do that? And so the 3 fundamentals for staying in comics. I absolutely love talking about this because I think breaking into comics panels, they feel like they're everywhere and at every convention. But what I think the real value of speaking to pros is, in my mind, is how do you stay in comics? Back when I was at Marvel, at the end of every year, me and CB would actually count up the number of people that were brand new that year and got their first paycheck over at Marvel. And I think I was at Marvel for a little over 2 years. And in those 2 years, I think it was about 185 names each year, which I remember at the end of that count, I'm like, why is that so high? Because I know there's not 185 new talents who, worked on Marvel Comics. And a lot of those folks might have been distributed throughout like Custom Solutions, doing comics for like Audi or Cirque du Soleil. Maybe they got distributed throughout Disney, the Disney relationship. Disney purchase was just getting going at that time. But also that said to me that out of that 185, there weren't many of those who stuck around and built longevity within Marvel. Because like you just can't have that kind of turnover. You can't just introduce that many people every single year without it actually being a really low rate of longevity. 3 fundamentals for staying in comics. Once again, it's talent. But I think one of the things that I've been seeing is folks who, whatever the maturity of their talent or their art style when they first broke in, it needs to constantly evolve. It needs to constantly stay in pace with the current tastes of the audience out there. And if anything, I think what people are finding more and more is that maybe their particular art style wasn't going to work for Marvel and DC 10 years ago, but now is gangbusters on Webtoon. The more a talent, whether it's a writer or an artist, stays static, honestly, the more they're going to fall out of favor. They're gonna show their age. But the talents that constantly refresh their style and the storytelling techniques always stay ahead of the curve. Professionalism. We were kind of just talking about that here, where one of my gigs one of my hats over at Marvel was essentially acting like the managing editor, because I was managing the schedules and the assignments for the colorists and the inkers, the folks who always were at the end of the chain, end of the assembly line, who had the least amount of time by the time everyone else further up the chain was complete. But that led to a ton of conversations where we'd be going to writers and to artists and telling them, look, the longer you're taking or to complete your work, or the more you miss your deadlines, the more you're actually making these other folks down the line suffer. And so that's not just affecting the book, that's affecting your relationships with those creators. Those creators are going to remember, like, let's say that colorist moves on to DC or moves on to work at Penguin or works at Webtoon. and then they start, the folks over there start asking what's like working with you as a penciler or you as a writer, they're going to remember that. So these are the things that, in terms of timeless, in terms of reliability, in terms of trust, something we keep on bringing up, professionalism is absolutely key to that. And I think it's something that people either take for granted as something that you have to actually be or actually just ignore. But it really is something that even the best of us still need to work on. And be nice. I think it's one of those things where I think out of everything we've just brought up here, the thing that I remember the most about the people I've worked with in comics is that they're good, nice, empathetic people. I think we all have horror stories. These are the stories that tend to make the rounds, especially online and on social media, of people who frankly have made our lives miserable. but like something I wish we talked more about was the people who really came through for us and really made us feel at home and treated us with respect and treated us like family. And I have seen people put more effort in being nice than their own talent. And that is actually what has kept them around in the industry longer than maybe anything else, because it's so much harder sometimes to find people that you want to work with and who make you feel great about working with them. In general, and maybe this is a bit of a loaded question, but what is the secret to longevity in the comic book industry? I feel like I've been seeing more frustration from creators with their career path. And folks I tend to talk to are people who've been around the industry for a long time, people who've got like 10 to 20 years plus worth of credits. And for whatever reason, plus the pandemic, obviously, but just a lot of things are coming together in 2020, 2021, where it just feels like there's a lot more folks more frustrated than ever. And so like I've been telling, people to do like the kind of things, Kyle, that you're doing, where, you're going to Kickstarter to produce your own creator-owned work. And, I've been telling folks to like explore ways to self-publish or publish with folks like Comic Experience Publishing that do creator-owned and give creators their full rights, as opposed to some other cases where maybe like things like media rights are split and revenue is split in other ways. But yeah, what do you guys have been seeing out there in the industry with people staying within the industry or maybe moving on and going into other fields and coming back? Have you been seeing more mobility in and out of comics than ever before, or people sticking around but facing new challenges?
I don't know. It's been a weird year. I know it feels like a big changing of the guard moment. I will say that. And I do think we get these kinds of waves from time. They're pretty cyclical. For me anyway, they end up probably just from experience bias, they end up kind of centering on big like seismic DC moves or sometimes Marvel, but we haven't really seen like a wave of new creators at Marvel in the way that we kind of have with DC, with things like the New 52 and then the DCU or Rebirth was the big one. And then now it's the Infinite Frontier that James and Josh are kind of, it seems like creatively, steering the ship on, and just seeing this influx of new creators or creators who had never worked at DC before, for example, doing their first work on big stuff. Seeing Stephanie Phillips take over Harley Quinn is awesome. Dan Mora is kind of defining the new age of DC visually. So I know that a lot of writers who were doing things there and a lot of people who were on exclusives there no longer are. And there's all sorts of behind the scenes reasons for that, notably the AT&T side of things. But so I know it does feel, I'm sure it does feel unstable in that way. Like I've been seeing creators that had previously done and kind of made their living doing big two step away. Snyder kind of launching his Best Jacket imprint. Everyone seems to kind of be looking to do the same thing. and that is basically like bet on themselves and their brand, because, you know, especially with Diamond shutting down during the pandemic, like that, I know that changed a number of creators' way of thinking about, oh, you know, should I be looking to Kickstarter and going more direct access the way like Jimmy and Palmiotti and Amanda have done for years. So I think, yeah, kind of everything's kind of on the table right now, but that also includes in the direct market because things are doing well there. You know, and things have been image launches have been doing very well the last probably 8 to 10 months. But yeah, it's I think everything is a little up in the air.
I covered a lot of what I was going to say, but yeah, I mean, I do think just from the perspective of trying to stay in, it is important to really like look for things besides comics to work on. And for me, you know, that's like stuff I'm doing with comic experience obviously is comics related, but, you know, teaching those classes and a lot of those other, you know, non-writing things. I also have a couple of things coming out next, like very small so far, but I'm hoping to build on them. Small projects that are writing but aren't comics writing. I just did my first non-comics G.I. Joe job recently that I'm excited to let people know about when that's announced. But yeah, you just gotta when you're building your career and when you're not at the point where you can like turn things down, you just got to take what you can and work really hard and build those relationships. I mean, like a lot of the comics work that I have done the last couple of years is stuff that people haven't heard about because it's been the special project stuff that you mentioned, that, you know, doing a lot of comics for, you know, car companies and you know, government agencies and things like that through Marvel. And I really appreciate that work because, you know, it's work for one thing. It's often fun and challenging and stretches me in new ways. And also because I know that those guys aren't hiring based on like who's a hot writer. They're hiring based on like who's going to be dependable and who they know can get the job done. So it's kind of heartening even when I'm not getting the work I would like to get elsewhere to know that like this group that's like really just looking at it from a pure can we depend on this person and will they do good work perspective keeps on calling me back. So yeah, I also think I've also like this has been to my benefit, but it's also been like mentally a little bit for as long as I think I've earned a reputation in comics as someone who can get something done very quickly when you have like a writer fall off of a project. So a lot of things I've gotten over the last few years have been like small projects that are basically like, hey, we need this in like a few days, or we need this, you know, this 40-page in like a couple of weeks. Can you do it? I'm like,
that's something I want.
Yes, I can do it.
That's something I want to loop back on. Because that's a big part of what I have a feeling about as far as staying in. So
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate those gigs, but at the same time, you know, when I get those, I always think like, you know, you guys know you can also hire me for things that aren't at the last minute, right? You know, like I'm available for those jobs too. But you know, like that's comics. You just gotta. It's just a constant hustle.
So for me, I want to inject a dash of ice water. And I'm sorry, but it's just one of those things that comes with being at the end of the line. The burnout rate of colorists is incredible. And the writers have a specific set of struggles, which is like getting things started and getting them going. And then I'm on the other end where like, I need to finish it. I need to get it out the door. So this causes me to think about things in a different way. And one of the things that I tend to really think about is how can I explain to somebody how not to burn yourself out? Because if you want to stay in comics, you cannot do it if you destroy your body or you destroy your mind. So people will need to be very aware when they're using specific crutches, like alcohol is a huge crutch in this industry, junk food eating. And like, I'm not going to be on like some health kick. I just want people to be aware of, like, for me, when I start drinking 3 beers in a night and I'm working till 1 a.m., I'm like, okay, we need to make some new choices. You know, like I'm not going to condemn anyone for this, but I do want people to be aware of when they are doing this thing. It's a sign that you're pushing yourself a little harder than your body wants you to. So with that, you have to figure out a way to, you know, have these two competing ideas exist. So for me, one of the things I do is I figure out my goals and I figure out my needs. And if you know what your goals and your needs are, you'll have a much easier time making decisions about, is this a good choice for me? Is this a good choice long-term? And one thing I would really, really like to emphasize, especially for people on the art end, on the production end, is that you can be a professional without all of your money coming from comics. And it, especially in the early years where it's very hard to get fair wages, you will probably need to work one or two other jobs. And you have to figure out how much you can do without burning out. Because like I had the reason I checked out last year was I just had like a big crash. I'd been staving off a burnout for a number of years and probably not making some great business decisions because of that. And then I just crashed hard, and it'll happen. So if you can avoid that by making wiser choices, which is hard, it's very, very hard.
I'm struggling with this right now.
It's absolutely a challenge. But the good news is there are tons of books on business because we are business people, whether we like to be or not. We have an incredible resource of generous peers who will help you, determine if something is, let's say, good in the way that, like, is a company acting appropriately, right? You can cross-check that with your peers, and they'll absolutely tell you, and they will absolutely give you ways out of it. So, and not everyone is going to be the 1% of big winners in this industry. We have a few very big winners, and they're very, very fortunate, and they've worked very hard to get where they are. But it is only 1%. So realistically, you really need to choose what your goals are and what your comfort level is. And if you can, try to avoid banking on being the 1% of winners.
Yeah, if anything, it sounds like the key is be nice to yourself first.
Yep. I think from the writing standpoint, as far as whether it gets you into that 1% or not, I mean, obviously you can't predict or plan for that whatsoever. I mean, I remember like I started out on some bigger stuff and knew that was what was happening, but also felt the pressure. And also it ended up being during an incredibly challenging time we now know historically, which was the New 52, and writing my all-time favorite character and wanting to quit at issue 4. And then realizing like, oh, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to happen for me. And then, my friends and friends like James, who came in after me, then far surpassing me there and just going like, oh, well, this isn't what it didn't work, But the thing is, if you do want to have the long career that we're talking about in whatever way, shape, or form it's going to take on, I do think there are things from a writing standpoint that you can think about as you're taking jobs in figuring out what kind of creator-owned stories you want to tell. Because I do think those choices can have, they can at least put a more favorable deck in your hand, or more favorable pocket cards before, the turn, right? Or whatever poker terms I'm sure I just butchered. Leave a comment below. And so through that lens, I think the biggest thing to me is first and foremost figuring out what type of writer you want to be in comics. Are you someone who wants to do this because the toys in the sandbox you grew up with or are the story, like you want to tell stories for pre-existing characters, right? That's one career path. And there are a number of writers who are very, very good at that and do that now. Those are your competition, right? But then the other path is Do you love the medium, and whether you like superheroes or not, you just want to be telling stories, your own worlds, your own stories, things like that. And then somewhere in between are where most of us fall, where we do like the superhero stuff, but we also love building our own worlds. And so that, in a weird way, I think within the direct market is actually a really nice place to be. It's one path at least, and it's a path that has demonstrably been kind of walked many times, and that is doing work that gets you an opportunity at the big two, trying to build some runs there, and then veering off back into the creator-owned world where your creator-owned work will sell better as a result of the more high profileness of some of the big two work. But the key to something like that, I think, and this is where it gets into like, how do you stay in comics? Well, I hate to say it, but at a certain point, what are you known for? What is your platform book? And no matter how many issues you might do on something, if you came in at issue 26, you're not the one that launched it. And there is, and even if you launch a book or launch a series, there's no kind of way to tell, will this work? Will this pop? Like you can't predict it. But what it does is it kind of gets you on the ground floor as a creator who builds things. And if one of those does start to work, think about Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye, right? Like that book, it was like, whoa. Obviously, Matt had been doing quite a bit of work before that, and he had a really successful run on Iron Man. But that was a book that was also in line with what he was doing on things like Sex Criminals and more of his indie stuff. And it was like, whoa, this is now a very unique voice that is tackling these characters. And that's, what you're getting when you get that kind of book. And so then that kind of, in some ways, becomes the thing that if you enjoy doing it, pigeonholing is not a bad thing if it's defining you in a way that you like. And if it's a type of stuff that you like and people are responding to it, then leaning into that in this day and age is not the worst thing in the world. Because ultimately, if it can get you to, like Radiant Black for me doesn't happen without Ultraman and then without Power Rangers before that. But I do think that there are ways, I think as a writer anyway, depending on the path that you really want to go, potentially as a creator, career-wise, I think there are ways to think about your moves and the types of books that you take on. And as Paul said, like if you're going to get known for whatever, people want to reduce you down into like 2 sentences across the board. It's human nature. If Paul is known as the guy, the 11th hour guy who can come in and save you, that's the only types of jobs that he gets thought of for by most, maybe not most, but by at least some people, by some editors. I have some friends who've done some big 2 work, but it's like, they closed out series. And so then it's like, well, they're not the guys you launch with that. I remember the editor that Paul was just telling the story about that he bounced around. I was going to take over a book at DC and I had this really cool take, and he called me and he said, "Hey, I don't want you to do that." I said, "Okay, why?" And he said, "It's going to get canceled in 6 issues or in 8 issues. He goes, "I don't want you near that." And it was like, oh, wow. And that was the first time I realized, like, oh, it's easy to form, like narratives get formed about you for reasons you're not even aware of sometimes, or you would think like you're a creator. You're just taking the work,
Yeah, I'm remembering, I think heading into the Hickman X-Men relaunch, mm-hmm. I think everyone sort of had this feeling that I think before it was even announced that there are a whole bunch of X-Men books that were moving forward that probably had an expiration date. Mm-hmm. And I knew even as those books were coming out, I'm like, these creators are going to get stamped with that.
I remember talking to some of those creators about that very thing as it was happening. Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of those things where it's like, I think among folks like us who've been around for a little while, we sort of like our instincts to hear that or to see that coming are sharper. But I guess for like, especially younger folks, what's some ways that they can figure out like how to
it's not even so much that like, oh, you shouldn't take that X-Men job then. Like, that's not what I would be saying there at all, just to clarify. Like, what I would be saying is like, yeah, you take that X-Men job, that's a fantastic platform. Figure out what you want to use it as a platform to.
Everyone sort of treats certain gigs or all their current gigs as the most important. But there are certain gigs that have different levels of importance and different roles in your career. And the most successful people I've found are the ones who know exactly which are which and know where to put most of their effort. But kind of what we were talking about a little earlier, I've certainly seen people burn out because they're putting importance on everything that they're working on right now,
right,
and killing themselves over something that honestly is there just to fill out the monthly budget for Marvel. It's not meant to launch anyone's career, or meant to, make any kind of headlines. But I still, because they've got the work ethic and they want to put as much of themselves in every single thing. But it's like calibrating what pages do you kill yourselves for and which pages do you not, is like something that it feels like people need to develop that sense of themselves.
I don't know. I mean, you are the quality of your work though as well, like reputation wise. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I understand the spirit of what you're saying.
Is there something you always wish someone would, like a question that you always wish someone would bring up at one of those panels, or a piece of advice that has stuck with you that you've heard on one panel that you've never heard at most other panels?
This is gonna like Marissa said, kind of throw ice water on it right at the end, but I just feel like these panels so often tend to treat it like do A, B, and C, and D will happen. And I'm glad we haven't really done that here. This feels like it's been a little bit more of a more honest conversation about the fact that, like, you can do everything right, you can do good work, you can hustle, you can network, and you still might end up stuck in second gear. I've heard that's happened to friends of mine. And that's just, and I'm not saying that's even necessarily like, what is a bad thing? I'm not saying that's necessarily something that should stop you from breaking into comics, but it's something I wish more creators were aware of going in, is the rareness of those opportunities and the capriciousness of who gets the right gig at the right time, and people who might not necessarily, that might not happen for. So, but like you're still making comics, and that's still a good thing, even if it's not happening for you the way you would like. And looking back the last 10 years of my career, I've been very lucky in some ways. I've done a ton of work I'm incredibly proud of. Even if I'm not where I would like to be, like if you could go back and show me at 10, 12 years ago how this career was going to go, I wouldn't be like, okay, I guess I'll just keep on working for the government instead then. You know what I mean? Like I would still be here. So
well, I feel like a lot of your work has really built up to Hollow Heart, and that has been so excellent. Like, it's just been a really beautifully crafted read.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Well, and we've got stuff coming up, Paul.
Yeah, very true.
One thing I do want to mention is let's bring up the perennial art school debate. Should you go to art school?
Time?
I'm going to sum it up as this. Like, again, stay focused on your goals. I was very fortunate in the art school that I went to that we had something called studio practice. And what this was it taught you a lot of the things that I try to emphasize whenever I'm on these panels, like know how to read contracts, understand what your contracts are saying, understand how your body is affected by what you're doing, and super duper importantly, learn how to keep yourself interested in your work. Because when you're on the cusp of burning out, like a little time just messing around, creating something for fun again can get that creative fire going again, and it just brings back the passion, and it really gives you the energy to go on. And you don't have to be on a mega book to do that. You can do it on the smallest thing.
Well, thank you so much all for your time. Comics Experience Publishing, which is the publishing label for Comics Experience, just launched this summer or this past May. We've got Stud and the Bloodblade coming out. Actually, I think if this is in July, it's going to be in a week or two. And Howling Snow coming out in August. You can look up more information if you go to cexpublishing.com. And there's also another newsletter there too that you could sign up for to keep on top of the latest news. Thank you everyone for your time. Thank you San Diego Comic-Con for the opportunity, and keep making comics.